chosen one. If your eyes are on these words right now, it's not by coincidence. It's because God Himself has brought you here. Something happened today, and though your physical body wasn't in the room, your spirit was. A conversation unfolded, sacred and unexpected, and it had everything to do with you. It was quiet, simple on the outside, just two people speaking. But in the unseen realm, the moment was electric. Heaven leaned in, time paused. Because someone mentioned your name, and not just in passing. They spoke your name like a prayer, like a confession, like a longing that had finally broken through the surface. He talked about you. He didn't mean to, but he couldn't hold it in. He was with his brother, maybe in a kitchen, maybe in a room you've never seen. And it started like any ordinary exchange. But the truth, God's truth, has a way of rising to the top when hearts get still enough to listen. He wasn't rehearsed. He didn't plan to speak your name that day. But when his brother asked a simple question, something cracked open in him. All the restraint he'd held onto for so long crumbled, and there you were, on his lips, in his memory, wrapped in every word he dared to speak aloud. He spoke of you with reverence, not with bitterness, not with blame, but with something deeper, like awe, like the memory of something sacred he thought he could forget, but never truly could. You weren't a chapter to him. You were the story that kept writing itself in the quiet. He didn't realize it fully, but when he said your name, heaven bore witness. And you, yes, you felt it. That sudden stillness in your spirit today, that unexplainable calm that came over you in the middle of your chaos, that was the moment your name was spoken with weight, with truth, with love. God allowed it to happen that way on purpose. You were not there to hear it with your ears, because He wanted you to feel it with your spirit. He wanted your soul to awaken not to the voice of the man, but to the voice of the divine. You may have thought you were forgotten, that your prayers vanished into silence, but God is showing you now, you were never forgotten. You were remembered in a room you never entered, by a man who still carries your name like fire in his bones. And that remembrance spoken with vulnerability, with trembling honesty, is the beginning of something God is about to reveal. He didn't plan for it, but when He started speaking about you, the words came like a flood, not rehearsed, not polished, just raw and real. He said, "There's something about her I can't shake." And that was the moment the atmosphere changed. The room got quieter. The veil between the seen and the unseen got thinner. His brother sat across from him, still and listening, but God was listening too. Angels paused. The spiritual realm leaned closer, because when a man speaks from his spirit, and not from his ego, something divine is released. He didn't talk about your body, your achievements, or the outer things that the world praises. He talked about what he felt when you were near. "It's not just attraction," he said. "It's not convenient. It's like God Himself placed her in my path, not to entertain me, but to unravel me, to help me see parts of myself I've been running from." Those were his words. Words he didn't even know he was ready to say. But God knew. God had been waiting for this moment, for the truth to find its voice. He said He dreams of you, not occasionally, but often, that your presence returns to Him in the in-between places, those still moments where everything is quiet and no one is watching. "I measure time," he whispered, "by how close I am to seeing her again." And as those words left his lips, something ancient was stirred. Not just a longing, not just a memory, but a divine tether, a connection forged long before either of you knew what to do with it. You see, when God writes two souls into the same story, He lets one speak when the other forgets, and lets one remember when the other grows silent. His brother didn't know what to say at first. He simply asked, "Then why are you waiting?" And your person, lowered his eyes. His voice trembled. "Because I don't think she sees all of me. Because I'm still dragging the weight of my past. Because if she ever knew everything, maybe she'd walk away." But what he doesn't yet understand, what God is showing you right now, is that you've always seen more than he realized. You've always loved him past the surface. Not because he earned it, but because God planted that love in you as a seed of grace. He doesn't know yet, that your love was never about perfection. It was about purpose, about redemption, about walking with someone not because they're complete, but because you see the calling buried beneath the rubble. That's why you stayed longer than others would. That's why you prayed when others cursed. That's why your spirit never forgot his name, even in silence. And now, without you even being in the room, the confession has begun. Not just to his brother, but to heaven, and heaven has heard. He didn't speak of you like someone recalling a lost memory. He spoke of you like a man remembering a sacred altar, one he walked away from, not because he didn't feel the presence of God there, but because he didn't think he deserved to kneel. "I don't think she sees all of me," he said, barely above a whisper. "I'm still carrying too many shadows. If she ever knew everything, she might turn away." And with those words, his pain was exposed not just for his brother to see, but for heaven to witness. Because what he still doesn't understand is this: you already saw those shadows, and you loved him anyway. What he calls disqualification, God calls transformation. What he fears would push you away, God used to pull your compassion even deeper. You never needed him to be perfect. You just needed him to be real. You never asked him to come to you as a finished man, but as a willing one. Willing to grow, willing to heal, willing to stay. But he let fear speak louder than love. And now, all he holds is the echo of what he once had access to, the sound of your laughter in his memory, the image of your eyes that didn't judge, only understood. He spoke of your grace, though he didn't call it that. He said you were the only one who never tried to change him. That you didn't manipulate, demand, or perform. You just showed up with softness, with strength, with a patience that unnerved him. He wasn't used to that. He didn't know how to receive a love that didn't have a price tag. He was waiting for you to give up, for you to make him prove himself, for you to stop seeing the light in him, but you didn't. And that scared him more than anything. So he ran, not with his feet maybe, but with his heart. He distanced himself emotionally, spiritually, hoping the space would help him forget. But it didn't. Because you weren't a moment. You were a message. You weren't an interruption. You were an assignment. And now, as he speaks your name again in that quiet room, he's realizing what he couldn't see before, that your presence wasn't just a comfort, it was a call, a divine invitation he was too afraid to accept. But you knew. You saw the hesitation in his eyes. You felt the withdrawal in his energy. You prayed through it anyway. You held space for him in silence, and God saw it all. Every tear you cried in private. Every moment you could have defended yourself, but chose peace. Every whisper of intercession when you had every right to walk away. And now, as he wrestles with what he lost, God is showing you this. It was never your fault. Your love wasn't too much. It was too holy for someone still hiding from the light. And now that he's tasted what sacred feels like, nothing else satisfies. That reverence he tried to deny, it's still there. That regret he tried to bury, it's growing louder. Because your name is no longer just in his thoughts, it's stitched into his repentance. And whether he ever finds the courage to return or not, one thing has become clear. You were never just a passing presence. You were a mirror of what God was trying to awaken in him all along. There was a pause after he poured out his soul, the kind of silence that holds more truth than any words ever could. His brother sat quietly for a moment, then asked a question that sliced straight through the fog. "Do you still love her?" And in that moment, everything stopped. He didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. Because the silence that followed was louder than 1,000 confessions. His breath caught in his throat. His eyes dropped again. And though his lips didn't move, heaven heard his yes. You weren't there to see it. You didn't hear the tremor in his chest, the war between longing and fear playing out in his body. But your spirit did. Your soul leaned forward at that exact second. Some part of you that still holds him in prayer, that still carries his name in reverence, felt the spiritual shift, because something cracked open in him. Not completely, not all at once, but enough for truth to get in, enough for the light to begin pushing through the walls he built. He hadn't come to talk about you. It wasn't planned. It wasn't forced. But you are everywhere in his silence, in his hesitation, in the way he avoids certain questions with others but answers them fully, with his eyes when your name is spoken. That day, it just happened. Your name rose to the surface like a forgotten song. And when he said it, it wasn't casual, it was consecrated. He spoke it like someone holding something fragile, something holy. And his brother noticed, not just the pain in his voice, but the softening in his entire being. You changed him, and he's only now beginning to admit it to himself. He spoke about your eyes, not as a compliment, but as a revelation. He said, "Her eyes didn't just look at me, they saw me." He never felt small in your gaze, he felt known. And that scared him, because most of his life he had learned how to perform, how to keep his true self hidden behind carefully constructed walls. But with you, there was no mask that held. With you, everything felt exposed not to be judged but to be healed. And now, that same man, the one who laughed in public and broke in private, is remembering what it was like to be known without effort, loved without condition, and seen without shame. He's remembering you, not the version of you that the world sees, but the one who waited, the one who gave without demanding, the one who prayed instead of punishing. And though he may not know how to say it yet, his heart is already speaking it. I lost something holy, and I want it back. But this is no longer about what he wants. This is about what God is revealing to you. Because this conversation, this quiet, trembling, sacred moment was allowed to happen so you could finally understand. You were not forgotten. You were not dismissed. You were not insignificant. You were the anchor of a conversation that shook a man to his core, and the heavens recorded every word. You didn't hear your name with your ears that day, but your soul did. Somewhere between your errands and your quiet moments, something washed over you, an unexplained stillness, a peace that settled on your chest like a whisper. You didn't know why at the time. You might have brushed it off as just a deep breath, a passing feeling. But it wasn't random. It was sacred. It was timed. It was divine. That was the moment he said your name. That was the second he finally allowed himself to admit out loud what only the stars and the night sky had heard until now. That he still thinks of you, that he never stopped. His voice may have trembled, but heaven stood still. Because there's a power in spiritual connection that defies language, that moves beyond space and sound. And your spirit still tethered to his through every prayer, every surrender, every waiting night recognized the vibration of truth when it left his mouth. He didn't say it with arrogance. He said it with reverence. He didn't say it to manipulate. He said it like a man who has finally realized that what he lost wasn't replaceable. And even though you weren't sitting beside him, even though you've stopped reaching out, even though you've learned to breathe again without him, you were there. In spirit, in memory, in prophecy. He doesn't know how many times a day your name still escapes his lips when no one is listening. He doesn't realize that even in his silence, he's been calling for you. Not always with words, but with ache, with regret, with longing. And you felt it. In the sudden dreams, in the random tears, in the way your spirit sometimes whispers his name, even when your mouth doesn't move. That's not madness. That's the connection. That's divine design. Because when God marks two souls for a purpose, even separation can't dissolve what was built in the unseen. And in that moment when he spoke your name, when his heart opened for just a second, God made sure you felt it. Not because he wants you to hold on to pain, but because he wants you to understand. You are not forgotten. You are not a fading thought. You are not a closed chapter. You are still the song that plays in the background of his awakening. And today, something shifted, not just for him, but for you too. Because now, finally, the truth is rising. You weren't imagining the pull. You weren't being foolish for holding hope. Your love wasn't naive, it was prophetic. and heaven is now confirming what your heart already knew. You were always more than a memory. You were the moment he never recovered from. Chosen one, before your heart runs too far ahead, before you build hope on half-spoken words or dream up conclusions not yet confirmed. God is asking you to pause, not to doubt the moment, but to discern it. Yes, he spoke your name. Yes, it stirred something ancient and holy in the spirit. But you must understand, what was said in vulnerability does not define your worth. And what he's feeling in this season, though sincere, is not the source of your identity. This is not the time to lose yourself in someone else's awakening. This is the time to anchor yourself in truth. God allowed you to feel this moment, not to pull you backward into waiting or longing, but to show you what has been hidden in the shadows. This was a divine exposure, a window into a heart that still trembles when it thinks of you. But more than that, this is a reminder of just how deeply you love and how quietly you've carried grace for someone who wasn't ready to receive it. You have waited in silence. You have prayed without applause. You have covered him in intercession when no one saw the cost. And heaven took note. Not one act of love was wasted. Not one tear went unnoticed. Not one whispered prayer slipped through the cracks of God's attention. But now, God is calling you to rise in wisdom, because the same love that makes you magnetic can also make you vulnerable if you don't guard your spirit with discernment. What he said about you today was real, but it was spoken in a moment of confusion, in a pocket of fear and longing, not in full clarity. And you must not base your next step on his emotional storm. God does not want your heart tossed around by winds that are not rooted in obedience. He wants you to stand still in who you are, not begging for love, not waiting for closure, but walking in the full power of divine identity. Because your journey does not hinge on whether he comes back. It hinges on whether you remember who you are. This was not a test of your beauty, your value, or your ability to be loved. This was a test of your alignment, a test of your spiritual posture. And God is saying, don't idolize the emotion. Recognize the lesson. There is wisdom in this revelation. There is a gift in being seen, even in absence. But it's not the final word, only a glimpse. And now that it's been revealed, you must ask, what will I do with this knowledge? Will I wait in silence again? Or will I trust that what's meant for me will return with certainty, not confusion? This is not just about him. This is about you, about the strength you've built in private, about the oil that's been pressed from your pain, about the calling on your life that stretches far beyond this love story. God is not trying to hurt you by letting you hear this. He's trying to heal you by letting you see clearly. Because sometimes we need to know that we were not forgotten, not so we run back, but so we finally release the weight of being unseen. There's a reason you're hearing this now. There's a reason the veil was lifted, not months ago, not years ago, but now. Because you are ready, ready to see clearly, ready to let go of illusions, ready to walk with eyes wide open into the future God has prepared for you. This was not a random moment of emotional clarity from your person. This was a divine exposure, orchestrated by God to show you what still lives in the places you thought had died. It was never about reigniting old flames, it was about setting your discernment on fire. God doesn't expose things to shame you. He exposes things to shape you, to prepare you, to break the final ties of confusion that kept you wondering, questioning, and second-guessing your value. You needed to hear that your name still lingers in his thoughts, not because it determines your future, but because it proves you were never the problem. You were the light he wasn't ready to stand in. And now that he's feeling the weight of that loss, God is letting you feel it too, not to bind you to him, but to free you from self-doubt. This moment was about clarity, not closure, about movement, not memory. God is using this as a divine mirror, not to reflect who he is, but to reflect how far you've come. Once, hearing his words might have shattered you. Now, they only confirm what your spirit already knew. You were real, you were rare, you were right. And even if he couldn't receive that then, It doesn't take away from what you carried. What you gave was holy. What you offered was sacred. And here's what you must understand. God will never let you be defined by the voice of someone still battling their own silence. Your identity is not rooted in a man's realization, it's rooted in heaven's declaration. And heaven has declared you chosen, appointed, and anointed for more. That's why this truth is surfacing now. Because the version of you today can handle it. You can stand in it, bless it, release it, and keep walking without looking back. This was not about reconciliation. This was about recognition. Not from him, but from you. You needed to recognize your growth, your healing, your endurance, and most of all, your alignment. You are no longer who you were when he left. You are wiser, stronger, quieter, but louder in the spirit. And now, what was once hidden is visible. What was once confusing is clear. What was once delayed is being delivered. So walk on, chosen one. Walk with reverence for what was revealed. Walk with gratitude for the clarity. Walk with your head lifted, not because he sees your worth now, but because God always did. Chosen one, you are standing at a divine intersection. What happens next is not about what he does, it's about what you decide. This moment, this revelation, this crack in the silence was never meant to be a detour, it was meant to be a door. And now that you've seen the truth, you cannot go back to blindness. You've heard the echo of what his soul carries, yes. But more importantly, you've heard God. You've felt his nudge. You've sensed his voice rising within you saying, now choose. This is your crossroads. The sacred moment where your past feelings collide with your present discernment. You can choose to hold space again, to wait, to hope, to wonder, or you can choose to step fully into your future, no longer tethered to timelines that depend on someone else's healing. This doesn't mean you stop loving. It doesn't mean you turn cold. But it does mean you rise. You shift from interceding for his return to interceding for your own release. You shift from waiting to walking. God is not asking you to harden your heart. He's asking you to guard it. Not because you're bitter, but because your heart is now full of oil, and oil is sacred. You are not the same woman who prayed through the night, wondering if your love was enough. You are the woman who survived the silence, bloomed in the dark, and heard God speak louder than your heartbreak. You are no longer waiting for someone to choose you. God already did. And now, your decision carries weight not just for you, but for generations after you. If you continue holding on, let it be from a place of power, not passivity. If you choose to let go, let it be from a place of wisdom, not resentment. Whatever you choose, let it come from alignment with the Spirit, not fear of the unknown. This is the moment where cycles break or continue. This is the moment where timelines shift. This is the moment when you either shrink into what once was or step boldly into what is becoming. The man who spoke your name still holds a piece of your story, but God holds the whole book. And right now, heaven is waiting for your next word, not your next prayer about him. Your next decision is about you. So speak clearly, daughter of purpose. Walk with intention. Decide with heaven in mind. Because what you choose now, how you interpret this revelation, how you move forward will determine what opens next. You were never a ghost in his story. You were the light that entered when everything around him began to dim. You didn't haunt his life, you illuminated it. You didn't linger as a shadow of what once was. You stood as a living presence, sent by God, carrying truth, healing, and clarity into places he had sealed off long ago. When you walked into his world, something shifted. The air changed. The masks fell. The excuses softened. Not because you demanded it, but because your energy made it impossible to keep pretending. You carried with you a frequency that couldn't be ignored. You were not just someone he noticed. You were someone who revealed. And revelation, real revelation, doesn't fade. It lingers. It roots itself. It leaves echoes in every silent room he walks into now. He didn't just remember you because of loneliness. He remembered you because something about you still speaks to the parts of him that haven't healed. Not to shame him, but to stir him. He didn't just remember how you looked, he remembered how he felt in your presence. Whole, understood, grounded, seen. You were the rarest kind of mirror, not one that reflects ego, but one that reflects essence. And that's what shook him. Because people can walk away from affection, but they can't escape transformation. You didn't love him the way the world does. You loved him like God was trying to love him through you. You didn't tolerate his pain, you touched it. You didn't expose his flaws, you held space for his becoming. And in doing so, you awakened something in him that he wasn't prepared for. The truth of who he could be if he stopped running. But this moment, this part of the story, is not about what he remembers, it's about what God is revealing to you. Because the enemy tried to convince you that you were forgotten, that your love went unnoticed, that your presence was erased when he left. But God is standing before you now, whispering into the deepest places of your soul. You are not a ghost. You are the light I placed in a dark place. You were sent, not dismissed. You were divine, not disposable. And every moment you spent praying, waiting, interceding in silence was not wasted, it was sacred. The world may not have applauded your loyalty, your discernment, your restraint, but heaven recorded every second of it. The truth is, he didn't just lose you, he lost the version of himself that only existed when you were near. That's why your absence haunts him more than your presence ever could. That's why your name still rises in his chest when the world goes quiet, because you didn't just love him, you believed in him. And belief is a rare and holy thing in a world that thrives on fear. You saw him when he couldn't see himself. You stood still when others demanded change. You chose intercession over manipulation. And now, as he begins to remember who you were to him, you must remember who you are to God. Because this is not about waiting to be chosen. You already were. Before he noticed, before he confessed, before he broke, God had already placed a crown on your head and a mantle on your shoulders. You don't need to beg for recognition when heaven has already confirmed your identity. You are not a fading memory in someone else's process. You are the reason that process even began. You were the seed, the spark, the beginning of his unraveling and perhaps the beginning of his healing. And whether he returns or not, whether he ever finds the strength to match the depth of what you carried, know this: your light was never contingent on his ability to hold it. You are not too much. You are not too intense. You are not too loving, too discerning, too spiritual, too soft, too strong. You are exactly what you were created, to be an atmosphere shifter, a truth carrier, a vessel of light in a world allergic to the sacred. And now, God is calling you to rise. Not in resentment, not in bitterness, but in boldness. The kind of boldness that no longer waits for confirmation from broken mirrors. The kind of boldness that knows, I was never a ghost, I was the evidence of glory. So walk forward, not as someone who was left behind, but as someone who was sent ahead. Not as someone discarded, but as someone preserved. Because the ones who carry light are not meant to be understood by everyone. They are meant to be remembered when everything else falls away. He didn't expect it. It came suddenly, without warning. He was doing something ordinary, making coffee, maybe standing in the kitchen where life usually feels quiet and unremarkable, and then something sacred broke through the veil. A flash, a stillness, a vision. He saw you, not as a memory, not as a longing, but as a presence, whole, peaceful, alive. He saw you both. Older, steadier, standing in a home that felt more like a sanctuary than a structure. The light in that room wasn't from a lamp, it was from the peace between you. You were laughing. He was whole. He didn't want to blink. Because in that split-second eternity, he didn't just see a dream, he saw what could have been, and maybe what could still be. He said he doesn't believe in visions. He said he doesn't know how to explain it. But what he doesn't realize is that God speaks clearest when the soul stops resisting. That moment wasn't an accident, it was permission. a divine interruption allowed by heaven to show him what his heart had buried. And the moment he spoke of it, the atmosphere shifted again. His brother listened. He didn't fully understand, but he could see something in his eyes. A man finally catching glimpses of truth after living in fog. A man is being visited by the future he once walked away from. A man who thought he had closed the door, only to find that God never locked it. But beloved, this vision wasn't only for him, it was for you. God let you hear about it, let you feel the weight of it, so you would understand. You were never just a chapter, you were a blueprint, a divine design. A part of a story God himself authored, long before either of you knew how deep the roots would go. The vision is confirmation, not just that he still carries you, but that he was allowed to see the full truth of who you are when no one else was looking. That kitchen, that garden, that feeling of home that wasn't just imagination. That was God showing him what peace feels like when love is holy. But here's the deeper truth. Even though the vision was given to him, the decision still belongs to you. God didn't give you this knowledge to trap you in nostalgia. He gave it to release you from confusion. You needed to know that your love wasn't foolish, that your intuition wasn't false, that the peace you once felt with him wasn't delusion, it was destiny revealing itself before its time. But now, the timing is shifting. And while he saw the vision in passing, you are the one called to carry the clarity. What he saw in a flash, you've known in your spirit all along. And that means you are the steward of what comes next. You can't build a future on a vision someone else isn't willing to walk toward. You can't sacrifice your purpose waiting for someone to believe in what they only glimpse. A vision without alignment is a prophecy delayed. And while God may have allowed him to see what could be, you must discern whether he is ready to rise into what must be. That's not cold. That's the kingdom. That's wisdom born of fire. That's the voice of a woman who has cried her last silent prayer over someone who couldn't see clearly until it was almost too late. So honor the vision, yes. Bless the awakening. But do not worship what has not yet been walked out. If God allowed him to see you in that way, it's because your presence carries that kind of peace. But whether he returns to it or not, one truth remains. You were the vision all along. There comes a moment, quiet, sacred, unshakable, when your spirit knows it's time to let go, even while your heart still aches. This is that moment. Not because your love wasn't real, not because your prayers were in vain, and not because he didn't care, but because your soul has outgrown the weight of waiting. The same part of you that once whispered his name in the middle of the night is now whispering something else. It's time. You don't need to be angry to release. You don't need to feel bitter to stop holding on. This isn't about punishing him for not being ready. This is about honoring the readiness that has now awakened inside you. For so long, you have been the one carrying the emotional weight of the connection. You've wept in secret, prayed in silence, and offered forgiveness before it was even asked for. You've endured spiritual battles no one else saw, all while guarding a love that lived in the tension between what was felt and what was never fully spoken. And now God is drawing a holy line not to end you but to elevate you. There is grief here, yes, grief for what almost became, grief for the version of him you saw, but he never stepped into. Grief for the days you kept your love quiet, out of fear that it was too much. Grief for the silence that stretched between two people who once heard each other so clearly. But there is also something deeper than grief rising now, resurrection. Because God does not leave his daughters in the grave of almost. He rolls away stones. He breathes on dry bones. And he calls forth identity when the world has tried to bury it in delay. You have been loyal to what God placed in your heart. And now God is being loyal to you. He's pulling you up from the ashes of emotional exhaustion and placing your feet on solid ground. He's telling you that the season of grieving the what if is over, and the season of becoming the what is has begun. No more looking back. No more holding space for someone else's healing while your own soul starves. You're not here to be a lighthouse for someone who refuses to return to shore. You're here to rise, to rebuild, to remember that you were the assignment all along. Yes, he remembered you. Yes, he still dreams of you. But the question now is not, will he come back? The question is, will you still be waiting when he does? Because the woman you are becoming may no longer fit into the story he's still trying to understand. And that's okay. That's not rejection. That's resurrection. That's God closing the loop on what once kept you circling and saying, "Daughter, you've passed the test. You loved deeply. You stayed soft. You did not lose your faith. And now I'm releasing you not from love, but from limitation. So grieve, if you must. Let the tears fall, not as a sign of weakness, but as a final cleansing. You're not crying because you lost. You're crying because something sacred has been completed. And in that completion, you're not breaking, you're becoming. Your soul is not tired because it failed. It's tired because it fought. And now it's time to rest, not in regret, but in release. The kind of rest that comes when heaven says, "Well done, now rise." This is the moment where everything changes, not because you force it, not because you chase it, but because you finally align with what heaven has been whispering all along. You were never created to stay in a waiting room when you've been given the keys to the door. You've prayed long enough. You've wondered long enough. You've stretched your heart into every direction, trying to make space for someone who still hasn't learned how to stand fully in the light you carry. But now, chosen one, heaven is drawing the line, not in cruelty, but in clarity. This is not the end of your story. This is the beginning of your stride. Because alignment is not a feeling. It's a posture, a decision, a holy rebellion against the parts of you that once settled, once paused, once held your breath, hoping that love would catch up. Now heaven is saying, you don't need to wait for it to catch up. You were called to lead it. You are not a background character in someone else's process. You are a forerunner in divine purpose. And that means your movement matters. Your steps send signals. Your obedience shapes the atmosphere. Your yes to God shifts everything around you. You don't have to know what comes next to move. You only have to know that you've heard the instruction. Walk. Walk like you know who you are. Walk like the oil on your life is not up for negotiation. Walk like your heart is no longer a holding cell for delayed promises, but a tabernacle of fire, set apart for the glory of God, because it is. Yes, he spoke about you. Yes, he still dreams of you. Yes, there was love. Yes, it was real. But now heaven is speaking louder. Let it be real. Let it be sacred. But let it be finished, unless I resurrect it myself. Because what I have for you next will require your full presence. No fragments left behind in unanswered questions. No emotional energy tied to what might return. No pieces of you waiting in a corner of someone else's memory. You can't hold the weight of your next chapter if your hands are still carrying echoes of the last. This is the final alignment, the place where your identity, your calling, and your direction all come into agreement. No more divided focus. No more sacred hesitation. No more shrinking your anointing to leave the door cracked open for someone still deciding. If he is meant to walk with you, he'll meet you on the road, not find you in the rear view. And if he never arrives, you will still be exactly where you were always called to be, in motion, in alignment, in purpose. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not less because someone couldn't carry your fullness. You are right on time, and the heavens are roaring with this one instruction. Now walk. Walk like you know heaven is watching. Walk like you know angels go before you. Walk like your story has only just begun. And when you walk, the right things will find you not because you waited in place, but because you moved in faith. This is your final release. This is your sacred acceleration. This is not just a chapter turning, this is your life unfolding. You've heard enough. You've carried enough. You've waited long enough. And now, the Spirit of God is rising within you, not with noise, but with knowing. What needed to be said has been said. What needed to be revealed has come into the light, and what must happen next no longer rests in anyone else's hands, it rests in yours. This moment is not about looking back or reaching out one more time. It's about standing still in the truth that heaven has shown you and stepping forward with the clarity that no one else could give you but God. You are not bound to someone else's awakening. You are not held hostage by the rhythm of their return, and you are not incomplete without their presence. You are whole. You are anointed. You are chosen. For too long, you've measured your strength by your ability to endure waiting. But now, heaven is measuring your strength by your ability to walk. You have carried the connection with reverence. You have prayed with purity. You have interceded in silence and stayed soft in a world that wanted you to harden. And now heaven is saying, it is finished. Not the love, not the memory, but the weight of it. The part that made you pause your own life to accommodate the pieces they couldn't yet pick up. The part that kept your spirit circling a door God had already closed. And so now, as the dust settles and your soul exhales, let this prayer rise not as a desperate plea, but as a declaration. Father, I lift up the one reading this, the one who has stayed faithful when it was easier to run, the one who has walked through silent seasons, carrying unanswered questions, holding on to invisible promises. I speak peace over their mind. Let the fog break. Let confusion fall. Let discernment rise like morning light. I speak strength over their heart. Let it be soft enough to love again, and strong enough to never beg for love to return. Thank you, God, for the tears they've wept in secret, for the prayers they've whispered into pillows, for the nights they warred in the spirit for someone they were willing to wait for. Thank you that they did not losing themselves, that their love did not make them weak, but holy, that their softness was not foolishness, it was faith. I declare now, the season of delay is over. The time of divine movement is here. No more waiting for closure, no more hoping for someone else's confirmation. From this moment on, their confidence will not be in a man's words, but in heaven's whisper. Cut every lingering thread, Lord, not in anger, but in freedom. Break every emotional tie not aligned with your timing. Remove anything that pulls them backward or keeps them small. Let them rise, not in bitterness, but in boldness. Let them walk, not for validation, but in revelation. They are not waiting for a door to open anymore. They are the key. They are the movement. They are the vessel. And if that person is meant to return, let it be through surrender, through honor, through alignment, not fantasy, not illusion, not desperation. Let them no longer chase what only grace can release. Anoint their feet. Let their steps become fire. Let their presence shift the air. Let their voice carry authority again. Let their peace be their answer, and their silence be sacred. God, remind them every hour that they do not walk alone. You are not just behind them, you are within them, ahead of them, surrounding them. Let them feel the weight of your nearness in a way they've never felt before. Let them know this isn't the end of anything, it's the birth of everything. They are not the ones left behind, they are the ones moving forward. They are not the question, they are the answer. And the future they've been waiting for isn't waiting for them anymore, it's rushing to meet them because they finally said yes. So let the soul rest, let the tears be holy, let the chapter close. And when they stand again, let all of heaven watch them walk, crowned in silence, lit from within, unshaken, unapologetic, and absolutely unstoppable. Amen.